You clicked because you want to know what the Amish believe waits for us on the other side. Stand with me a moment. Picture a plain room, a pine box on two sawhorses. No satin, no perfume, no soft music. Just a family sitting quiet and a strange thing you can feel in the air. They are not afraid. That is the claim I could not shake, and it is the whole reason for this video. The Amish face death with a calm that modern people spend fortunes chasing and never find, and the way they do it is not some mystery lost to time. It survived on purpose, written down, guarded, carried across an ocean. I am going to take you all the way to a small confession of faith signed in a Dutch town in the year 1632, and to a burial custom so quiet and so personal that when I first learned it, I had to sit down. Stay with me, because what I found does not only explain how they die, it changes how you might choose to live in the very house you are sitting in right now. I will be honest with you. I spent most of my life doing death the expensive way. When my own father passed, I signed papers I never read, in a room with soft carpet and softer voices, and I walked out owing more than $9,000. I remember standing in that parking lot, holding a folder of receipts, feeling like I had been robbed while I was too broken to notice. That feeling never left me, and it is what sent me, years later, into plain country, asking questions I was almost afraid to ask. Because here is the first thing that stopped me cold. An Amish man I came to know in Holmes County, Ohio, told me his community does not use a funeral home at all. When someone dies, the body stays in the house. The family washes it, the neighbors build the coffin, and the whole thing, start to finish, costs less than the tank of gas it took me to drive out there. I did not believe him. I thought he was exaggerating for the outsider, so I started pulling the thread. What I learned is that when an Amish person dies, word travels by voice and by note, farm to farm, sometimes within the hour. The men in the church district drop their own work. Some dig the grave by hand. Others plane down boards of pine or poplar into a simple six-sided coffin, wider at the shoulders, narrow at the feet, no lining, no brass, no shine. The women cook, and the body is not shipped away to strangers. It is bathed and dressed by the people who loved it. Now sit with that for a second. In the world you and I live in, the moment a person dies, we are trained to pick up a phone and hand the body to a company. We never touch it again. We pay someone to do the one last tender thing a family used to do for its own. The Amish never handed that over, and I started to wonder why the rest of us did. But the coffin was only the beginning. Because the next thing I noticed at their funerals was what was missing. There is no eulogy. Think about every funeral you have ever attended. Someone stands up and lists the accomplishments of the dead, their job, their awards, the money they made, the things they built, the way everyone will miss them. We spend the whole service praising the person. At an Amish funeral, that does not happen. The name of the dead is barely spoken. There is no speech about how wonderful they were, no slideshow, no soloist. Instead, 2 or 3 ministers preach, sometimes for an hour or more, and they do not talk about the person in the box. They talk about the shortness of life. They talk about how every soul in that room is going the same direction. They read from Scripture, often the same passages read at the funeral before and the one before that, going back generations. The first time I heard this, it struck me as cold. Where is the love? Where is the honor for the one who died? Therefore I asked, and the answer turned everything upside down. An older woman explained it to me plainly. She said, "We do not praise the dead, because praise belongs to God, not to a person. To stand up and glorify one human being," she said, "would be a kind of pride, and pride is the very thing we spend our whole lives trying to lay down. The funeral is not about the one who left. It is a warning and a comfort for the ones still here. It says, 'You too will lie in this box. Are you ready?' That is a hard message, but watch what it does. It strips away the terror, because when death is spoken of openly, plainly, at every funeral, in front of every child, it stops being the monster hiding in the closet. It becomes a doorway everyone in the room already knows they will walk through. And here is the peace that unlocked it for me. Amish children are not sent away when someone dies. They are not told Grandpa is sleeping, or that we lost him, or any of the soft lies we tell to protect the young. They are lifted up to see the body. They touch the cold hand. They sit through the long service. They watch the coffin lowered and the dirt shoveled in by hand, by men they know. So an Amish child of 8 has already stood at the edge of a grave more times than most of us have by 50. They grow up with death as a neighbor, not a stranger, and a neighbor you see every day does not frighten you. But this raised a bigger question in my mind, one that kept me up at night. Where does this calm actually come from? A quiet funeral is one thing, but you cannot fake the peace I saw on those faces. That comes from a belief about what happens after, and to find that I had to go back much further than any farm in Ohio. I had to go back to 1632, in a Dutch city called Dordrecht. In the year 1632, a group of Anabaptist leaders sat down and put their faith into writing. They produced a document of 18 articles, and it came to be called the Dordrecht Confession of Faith. If you have never heard of it, you are not alone, but almost every Amish person alive today has. It is still read. It is still taught to the young before baptism. It is nearly 400 years old, and it is more alive in those communities than most books printed last year. And inside that confession is the heart of how the Amish understand death. Now here is where it gets strange, and where I want you to really listen, because this surprised me more than anything else I found. When I asked Amish people whether they were sure they were going to heaven, almost none of them said yes. I want you to understand how odd that sounded to my ears. In the world I grew up in, people say it all the time. I know I am saved. I know exactly where I am going. It is spoken with total confidence. But the Amish I spoke with would not say it. Instead, they used a phrase I kept hearing over and over, a living hope, not certainty, hope. At first I thought this meant they were fearful, unsure, anxious about the end. It is the opposite. They believe that to declare with pride that you have your ticket punched and heaven guaranteed is itself a kind of arrogance. It puts you in the judgment seat that belongs only to God. So instead of claiming certainty, they live in humble hope, doing their best to walk the narrow way and leaving the verdict where they believe it belongs, out of their hands. There is a word they use for this whole way of being, Gelassenheit. It is a German word, and it is hard to translate, but it means something like yielding, letting go, submitting yourself, your will, your plans, even your fear to the hand of God. It shapes everything about them, the plain clothes, the refusal to push themselves forward, the way they will not fight back when wronged, and it shapes how they die. To die well, in their eyes, is simply the last and greatest act of letting go. So the calm in that room was not because they were certain of a reward. It was because they had spent their entire lives practicing the surrender that death finally asks of everyone. That clue clicked into place for me. But it opened a door onto something darker and much bigger, and I could not turn back once I saw it. Because a people who die this calmly, who refuse to fear death, who cannot be frightened into buying anything to hold death off, that kind of people is very hard to sell to, and I began to wonder who lost money because the rest of us never learned this. Hold that thought, because first there is one more piece of the Amish story, and it is soaked in blood. There is a book in almost every Amish home. Next to the Bible, it may be the most important book they own. It is enormous, over 1,000 pages, and it is called the Martyrs Mirror. It was first published in the Dutch language in the year 1660 by a man named Thieleman van Braght, and it tells, in relentless detail, the stories of Christians who were tortured and killed for their faith, going back to the early church and running right through the Anabaptist persecutions of the 15 and 1600s. These were their ancestors, real people with names, who were drowned, burned at the stake, beheaded, imprisoned, hunted across Europe for refusing to baptize their babies and refusing to bow to the state church. One story in that book has become almost sacred among them. It tells of a man named Dirk Willems. In the year 1569, he had escaped from prison and was fleeing across a frozen pond. The guard chasing him fell through the thin ice, and Dirk Willems turned back. He turned back to save the man who was hunting him, pulled him out of the freezing water, and for that act of mercy he was recaptured and burned to death not long after. The Amish read that story to their children. They read it so that a child understands from a young age that faith is worth more than life itself, and that death is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. Betraying your conscience is worse. Failing to show mercy is worse. When you are raised on stories like that, the modern fear of death looks small. These people descend from men and women who sang hymns while they were being led to the stake. In fact, the hymns they still sing on Sunday come from a book called the Ausbund, and some of those very hymns were written by prisoners awaiting execution, sitting in a dungeon in a castle called Passau in the 1530s. The Ausbund is believed to be the oldest hymnal in continuous use anywhere in the world. When an Amish congregation sings today, slow and unaccompanied, drawing out each note, they are singing the words of the condemned. They are keeping company with their dead. And somehow, that humility produces more peace than all the loud certainty I had ever witnessed. If this way of thinking has grabbed you the way it grabbed me, I want to mention something before we go further. I have spent years digging into the foundations, the practices, and the plain wisdom behind how the Amish actually live and die, and I put the most important of it into a series of books called Amish Foundations, Amish Mastery, and the Amish Blueprint. They are not academic. They are written for people sitting in ordinary houses who sense that something real was quietly taken from them. If that sounds like you, you can find them mentioned in the description below. Now, back to the word that unlocked everything for me. So death, for them, is not an ending to be feared. It is a reunion, a homegoing. The word many of them use for a funeral is not funeral at all. They speak of it as a person being called home. And now the villain in this story finally stepped out of the shadows for me, because I started asking a simple question. If death used to be handled this way, at home, by the family, plainly and cheaply, for thousands of years, Then when did it change for the rest of us? When did we start handing our dead to companies and paying thousands of dollars to do it? The answer sits right there in American history, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. For most of human history, in this country included, the dead were cared for at home, the family washed the body, neighbors built the coffin, the wake was held in the front parlor of the house, which is the very reason old homes had a formal front room. The body was buried on family land or in the churchyard, usually within a day or two, because there was no way to preserve it. Then came the Civil War. In the 1860s, thousands of young men were dying far from home, and grieving families wanted their sons brought back for burial. A new trade rose up to meet that need, a chemical process to preserve the body for the long journey, embalming. It was rare before the war, it became common after, and a man could make good money doing it. By the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, that trade organized itself into a profession, then an industry. The parlor moved out of your house and into a business, and they called that business a funeral parlor, borrowing the very name of the room they were replacing. The front room in your house got renamed the living room, which is a detail that still gives me chills, because it marks the exact moment the American family pushed death out the front door and paid a stranger to take it. And once death was a business, the incentives flipped. A family caring for its own dead spends almost nothing. An industry caring for your dead needs you to spend as much as possible. So we were sold the casket with the sealed lid and the inner spring mattress, as if the dead need a good night's sleep. We were sold the embalming as if it were required, when in the vast majority of cases it is not. We were sold the concrete vault, the limousines, the printed programs, the flowers by the truckload. Today, the average American funeral runs somewhere between $7,000 and $12,000 for one death. And most families, drowning in grief, sign for all of it without asking a single question, exactly as I did in that parking lot, holding my folder of receipts, feeling robbed and not knowing why. The Amish never signed up for any of it, not because they could not afford it, but because they never surrendered the knowledge in the first place. They kept doing what everyone used to do, and by keeping it, they expose just how much the rest of us are paying to have our fear managed for us. Now I know exactly what you are thinking, because I thought it too. You are thinking, that is fine for the Amish. They live out on farms with their own land and their own community and their own graveyards. I live in an ordinary house, on an ordinary street. This has nothing to do with me. So let me talk straight to you now, because this next part is for you, the person in the regular house, and it is the part almost nobody knows. You do not have to be Amish to reclaim any of this, and you do not have to wait for a death to start. Here is the first thing you can do this very week, sitting in the home you already own. It costs nothing. In most of this country, a family still has the legal right to care for its own dead, to keep the body at home, to wash and dress it themselves, to hold the viewing in their own front room, exactly the way it was done for centuries. A handful of states require you to involve a licensed director for certain paperwork, but even in those states, the family can do far more of the caring than the industry ever tells you. They do not advertise this. It is not in their interest to advertise this, but it is your right, and it has always been your right. The Amish keep the body cool with simple blocks of ice, or in cooler weather, an open window, and they hold the burial within 2 or 3 days, the same natural timing families used for thousands of years before refrigeration and chemicals were ever invented. You can learn this There are volunteers and home funeral guides in many communities who will walk a family through it for free or nearly free, because they believe, as the Amish do, that caring for your own dead is not morbid. It is the last gift of love, and it should never have been sold back to us. But even if you never plan a home funeral, there is something smaller you can start today, and this is the true heart of what I learned out there. The Amish calm around death does not come from the funeral. It comes from a lifetime of not hiding from the subject. So stop hiding from it. Talk about it at your own table. Tell your children and your grandchildren, plainly and without the soft lies, what you believe and what you want. Write down in your own hand how you wish to be cared for, what box, what clothes, what songs. Say it out loud while you are healthy, so that when the time comes, your family is not standing in a carpeted room signing papers in a fog of grief, being sold a sealed casket by a stranger. That single habit, ordinary talk about death at an ordinary table, is available to you tonight, and it is the seed of the very peace you saw on those Amish faces. And now I can tell you the thing that made me sit down, the custom I found buried in the corner of Amish life that, once I understood it, made everything else fall into place. It has to do with what an Amish woman is buried in. When a young Amish woman marries, she does not buy a white gown to wear once and box away. She sews, or has sewn, a plain dress, often in blue or purple, worn with a white cape and a white apron over it. That white cape and apron are the mark of the day, and here's the part that stopped my breath. In many communities, she keeps that white cape and apron her entire life. She folds it away in her chest, and when she dies, an old woman, decades later, having raised her children and buried her own parents and grown gray, she is dressed for burial in that same white cape and apron she wore on her wedding day. She is buried as a bride. I want you to feel the full weight of that. In her world, the day she married and the day she dies are wearing the same cloth. The two are not opposites. They are bookends of one faithful life, and the same white garment covers them both. To her people, death is not the end of the marriage or the end of the story. It is the wedding feast at the other end. It is the bride going to meet the bridegroom, an image straight out of the scripture they read at every funeral. The men, in the same spirit, are often buried in plain white as well, the white of the newly baptized, so that a person leaves this world dressed the way they entered the church, washed and simple and ready. Think about what that does to a life. A woman opens that chest and touches that white cape 100 times over the years. Every time she is reminded, quietly, that her wedding and her funeral are cut from the same cloth. Death is never allowed to become a stranger, because it is folded up in the same drawer as the happiest day of her life. She has been preparing for it, gently, joyfully, since she was a young bride. And that is the secret. That is where the calm comes from. Not from certainty, not from denial, from a lifetime of keeping death close, dressed in white, folded in the chest at the foot of the bed, treated not as the enemy but as the final homecoming she was promised on her wedding day. You will not find that in a brochure at a funeral home. You will not find it in the glossy catalog of sealed caskets. It was never for sale, because it can never be sold. It has been passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, since long before that confession was signed in Dordrecht in 1632, and it is still being folded into chests in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Indiana tonight. We did not lose this knowledge by accident. It was quietly taken out of our homes, out of our front parlors and turned into a product with a price tag, while we were too grieved to notice. The Amish simply refused to hand it over. If you have felt deep down that the way we handle death in the modern world is wrong, too expensive, too cold, too hidden behind carpeted rooms and soft voices and papers you sign in a daze, then trust that feeling. You are the kind of person who senses when something real and human has been pulled out of your hands and sold back to you at a markup. Your instinct was right all along. So let me ask you something, and I truly want your answer. When you were a child, what were you told when someone died? Were you sent out of the room? Were you told they were only sleeping? Or did someone have the courage to tell you the truth, the way the Amish tell their children? Write it down in the comments and tell me. I read them, and this one matters to me. And if you are done letting big industries quietly manage your fear and empty your pockets, then come with me. Subscribe and stand with the people who are recovering the plain knowledge that was taken out of our homes, one piece at a time. Because next I am going to show you what the Amish keep in that very chest at the foot of the bed, the one where the white cape is folded, and one of the things inside it can save a family thousands of dollars in a single afternoon. You will not believe it was legal to know this all along. Before you go, let me say this. What you just watched was only the surface. Inside the plain living circle, I walk you through the full Amish way of dying. And in there you can ask me your own questions, and a real person, me, answers you back. You'd be joining plain living folks like you already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time with one click.